The Berghof, Hitler's alpine refuge near Berchtesgaden. This is where Adolf Hitler liked to retire from the public, with a woman by his side. Eva Braun was Hitler's lover. He kept their relationship a secret from the German people. Private film recordings show Eva, her sister and architect Albert Speer's wife picking flowers. To this day, she is considered a non-political, naive adjunct of the mass murderer. But who was this blonde, who is also called Satan's bride?
Eva Braun war eine junge, blonde.
Eva Braun was a young, blonde and attractive woman. She was very much into sports. On photographs, she appeared to be very joyful and lively.
During the more than 13 years of their relationship, this girl from a lower middle-class family turned into the uncompromising companion of the dictator.
Underneath this often fake facade, there was a very determined woman who tried to achieve her goals with an incredible toughness and consistency. It showed already quite early, and she also stressed it to Hitler that she would take things to the last consequence, even to her death.
Her biographer wrote that Eva Braun was vain, caught between power and impotence, and by no means a victim. She earned her name in history, even though it's a dubious one. One of the few film recordings that show Adolf Hitler together with his lover on the terrace of the Berghof.
Eva Braun
was always depicted as a slightly dumb blonde, and Hitler as the detached leader, the inhuman monster who was unable to lead a regular private life. But now we know that this wasn't the case at all. Both had a very close relationship for more than 13 years. And he wasn't detached, but rather tolerant and protective towards her.
Everything that pointed to her existence was supposed to be destroyed after their joint suicide in 1945. But the private recordings of Eva Braun survived and allow insights into a rather strange relationship.
He seems like the complete opposite of her. A bit uptight, elderly, tensed up. At first sight, they don't seem to fit together at all. But if you look behind the scenes, you can see that they had a lot of common interests. They both loved movies, the opera and operetta, and what really defined their relationship was their commitment towards each other. Total faith and loyalty.
In 1946, several hours of film recordings and dozens of photo albums were discovered at the Austrian home of an SS soldier who failed to destroy the materials. Those images allow a look behind the curtains that wasn't made public to the Germans during the Nazi period. They give the illusion of a harmless, idyllic life. Officially, Hitler's lover was employed at the Berghof as his private secretary. She and her younger sister Gretel were amateur film enthusiasts and documented many private moments for years. Die bunte Filmschau, aufgenommen von Eva Braun. Colourful movie moments recorded by Eva Braun, was mainly supposed to entertain Hitler's inner circle. She called this film Pünktchen am Berg. It was presumably recorded in the summer of 1937. 16mm colour film had become available only recently, and the Braun sisters enjoyed spending their time with this unusual toy. Beside Eva Braun sat her friend Marion Schönemann and the wife of Hitler's private secretary, Gerda Bormann. They took turns in taking photos and filming each other. Gretel Braun, on the right, was as enthusiastic about filming as her older sister. Hitler was absent most of the time, so bathing trips with family and friends were a welcome change. Eva Braun especially liked to have her sports activities filmed. At Lake Starnberg, Eva and Gretel were joined by their mother, Franziska, and father, Friedrich Braun. The Führer's lover was 25 at that time. Little is known about Eva Braun's childhood and teenage years. Her photo albums provide an insight into her early life. Eva Anna Paula Braun was born in Munich on February 6, 1912, the second of three daughters to vocational school teacher Friedrich Braun. Her parents' marriage had survived a crisis during the early 20s. Eva grew up in a middle-class environment in Munich, Schwabing. Eva Braun was also the centre of attention during a bathing trip to Wörth Lake. Like every year, the Brauns' relatives from Jena visited Munich and accompanied the family on their trips. Cousin Gertraud greatly enjoyed the time in the water. Aunt Fanny and Uncle Fritz were very fond of 13-year-old Eva. Gertraud kept their relationship with the Brauns a secret for more than 60 years. Only her husband knew and forbade her to mention it. Not until the year 2000 did Gertraud Weiske decide to provide information about her cousin, Eva Braun.
We met with my aunt once or twice a week and went on a trip somewhere, to Chiemsee or Ammersee. Sometimes Eva and her sisters joined us. I enjoyed their visits a lot. It was a great family time. We went swimming or had coffee and cake and returned to our quarters at my grandparents' in the evening. My father never joined us. He made it quite clear that he didn't want any contact with Eva.
Eva's relationship with her parents wasn't as relaxed as the films might suggest. Her best friend later reported that Eva spent most of her youth at her parents' place, as the atmosphere at Eva's home wasn't very pleasant. Eva took courses in housekeeping, bookkeeping and typewriting at a Catholic boarding school. In 1929, she successfully applied for an apprenticeship at a well-known Munich photo shop. Heinrich Hoffmann was the shrewd personal photographer to Adolf Hitler. At one point, he introduced his new worker to him. "This is our brave little Fräulein Eva." Apparently, the two of them met frequently afterwards. Hitler confided to his adjutant, "For love, I keep a girl in Munich."
Sie war 17 und er war 40. Also er war ein schon etwas ältlicher.
She was 17 and he was 40 years old.
Dieses Mädchen offenbar attraktiv
This
fand.
elderly bachelor apparently was smitten by this girl, and she found him impressive, as did many women at the time.
Vor allen Dingen auch viele, die zu seinem direkten
And so did her boss, Heinrich Hoffmann, whose part in the initiation of this relationship stays rather inconclusive to this day.
Rolle gespielt, die allerdings bis heute unklar bleibt.
Eva Braun's private photo albums shed a light on the true story. In 1931, she was allowed to accompany Hitler to Obersalzberg for the first time. There were no photos showing the two of them together. The blonde felt neglected. She wanted him to commit himself to her totally, even turning her father's gun on herself.
Als 17-Jährige muss man sie sich vorstellen als relativ.
She was a rather joyful and naive 17-year-old, but at the same time she was quite extroverted.
Sie hatte doch immer einen Drang, sich auch
She liked her picture taken and was by no means a shy girl.
Their relationship grew closer. Hitler told Heinrich Hoffmann that he realized from the incident that the girl really was in love with him and that he felt the moral obligation to care for her. Eva Braun's family was anything but euphoric about this relationship without a marriage certificate.
I was 9 years old when I got wind of it by reading it in the papers. I saw a photo of Eva and Hitler. I think he was on it too, and the caption read, "Eva Braun, a teacher's daughter from Munich, is Hitler's new favorite." I showed it to my mother and she said, "Don't talk about this. It's not true. This is nonsense and I don't want it mentioned again."
As Hitler made no attempts to legitimize that relationship, Eva Braun was considered his mistress by her relatives. Photos of that time show her as a fashionable young woman who apparently was more interested in hairstyles and clothing than politics. Her cousin Gertraud recalls,
Sie war 12 Jahre älter als ich.
This attractive young woman was 12 years my senior, a very attractive woman, and I admired her and her sister. She was well groomed with her long fingernails, and I enjoyed meeting and spending time with them.
Aber mit 10 Jahren, da macht man sich keinen Gedanken darüber.
As a 10-year-old, I didn't wonder whether I wanted to become like her and didn't really think about it. We fooled around like young girls do. She was very much into sports, dived from the highest platforms, whereas I only managed the lowest one. Despite the feelings of my other relatives and the difference in age, I idolized her as the athletic young woman she was.
The private film recordings from 1937 only show the joyful side of the Führer's lover, who suffered from her relationship with Hitler. It had only been 2 years since Eva Braun's emotional low. Fragments from her diary survived. She noted on May the 10th, 1935, "Miss Hoffmann told me both in a loving and tactless way that he now has a substitute for me."
Ich würde sagen, nach dem, was ich heute weiß,
From what I know today, I would say that she was pretty depressive, and she always had to disguise this depression. With sports, with clothing. She always needed to distract herself from her sorrows, but nobody realized it in everyday life.
He should know me well enough to see that I would never put obstacles in his way if he should fall in love with another woman. Why should he care about what becomes of me? 23-year-old Eva's manic depressive moods soon became apparent to her family.
Die Familie hat's gewusst, ich habe es zum Beispiel nicht gewusst.
Her family knew. I didn't, but in retrospect, all this changing of clothes was manic behavior. She changed 5 or 6 times a day at the Berghof, where basically nobody was there to see and admire her. She did it just for herself. And she also found it hard to concentrate. She used to ask me, "What are you doing?" And when I started telling her about mass or something, she just replied, "Never mind." She quickly lost focus, deliberately or not.
Wollte sich nicht konzentrieren.
She complained, "Hitler only needs me for certain things." When the dictator was travelling, she didn't hear from him. Eva Braun attempted suicide for a second time on May the 28th, 1935, this time with sleeping pills. She noted, "This time I'll take 35 pills. I want to make absolutely sure. If he'd only call."
Der Selbstmordversuch Eva Brauns zeigt,
Eva Braun's suicide attempt shows that this relationship at the time had evolved into something deeper.
dass es auf
It
keinen
wasn't
Fall
superficial
eine
anymore,
Beziehung
and
war,
something had gone
sondern
wrong.
dass diese Beziehung irgendwie aus dem Ruder geraten war. Es hätte
He
ja auch
could
so
have
sein können,
been
dass dadurch
appalled
abgeschreckt
by it
wäre.
and could have tried to get rid of her,
Versucht hätte, sie
but
loszulassen.
instead he saw it as a proof of her total commitment and loyalty, which was exactly what he expected from his disciples. Loyalty until death, and she was ready to give and live it.
Bereit zu geben und zu leben.
Eva's parents reproached her constantly and made it impossible for her to remain at their home. Finally, she moved to a house in the elegant district of Bogenhausen, which Heinrich Hoffmann bought by order of the Führer. Hitler's private apartment was close by. Eventually, she was allowed to quit her job at the photo shop. For appearance's sake, her sister Gretel also moved to the small house with a garden. In 1938, Eva Braun became its official owner.
Ich wusste nicht, von wem sie das Haus bekommen hat.
I didn't know who had given her the house. All I knew was that she and Gretel moved out of their former home and moved there now. They were old enough to do so after all. But I didn't know anything else about that house, that it was a present of Hitler's. Nobody ever talked about it.
Lavish parties were frequently held at the house, but the mood was anything but festive, as Eva's father didn't want to accept the disgrace that she was bringing upon the family. Her biographer doubts the credibility of Friedrich Braun's later statement that he had written a letter to Hitler ordering his daughter to return to the family home.
Es herrschte bisher
To date, it was assumed that her father was against National Socialism. But the questioning he had to go through after 1945 showed that he apparently believed in the Führer until the end.
Mit den Spruchkammerverfahren, dass dort sagte, habe bis zuletzt an den Führer geglaubt.
Therefore, nobody in the family was in opposition to the regime.
Zu diesem System gegeben. Es hat niemanden in dieser Familie gegeben, der sich im Widerstand befindet.
Everybody benefited from it, from the mother to the youngest daughter.
Von der Mutter bis zur jüngsten Schwester.
There was no falling out with the family. On the contrary, Eva's parents were now also welcome guests at Obersalzberg. Like their daughter, they accepted the fact that Hitler wouldn't marry his life partner. Apparently, Franziska Braun convinced her husband that resisting this relationship, especially as it was quite persistent, would be futile. Any daughter can get a husband, but someone like Hitler? That was something different. Eva Braun used uncharacteristic toughness and well-aimed intrigues to drive possible rivals for Hitler's favour away from Obersalzberg. Her position there became undisputed over the years. "I'm the lover of Germany's and the world's greatest man," she allegedly once said. Officially, there was no talk of any woman at Hitler's side. The dictator said, "My bride is Germany." Nazi propaganda claimed that the Führer had no private life. He served the German people day and night. Film and photography had become Eva Braun's biggest passions. She loved to stage her lover on the Berghof's terrace. The film seemed to show the Führer transported to another world, distanced from his people, welcoming friends and political companions up there. Some of her photo spreads survived uncensored in her private albums. showing Eva Braun's professional work.
Diese Filme und Fotos, die Eva Braun von Hitler
The films and photos Eva Braun shot of Hitler and the people at the Berghof weren't just of a private nature. She still worked for Heinrich Hoffmann and also created those works to sell them, and she sometimes got big sums of money for them.
Und erhielt dafür sehr viel Geld zum Teil. Für eine einzige Fotoarbeit 20.000
One single photo for 20,000 Reichmarks, for example. She was part of the propaganda machinery, part of Hoffmann's propaganda department, who staged the Führer's private appearances. She presented him as a caring family man, a child-loving patron.
Patron, das passt eigentlich.
This doesn't really fit with the perception people used to have of her, that she made those photos only because she dreamt of a family life with Hitler. No, she used those photos for business, and Hitler was well aware of that. It was part of the plan.
Among the most welcomed guests at the Berghof were Hitler's favourite architect Albert Speer and Joachim von Ribbentrop, who was appointed foreign minister in 1938. Heinrich Hoffmann and his wife were also often present.
Hitler verließ sich im Grunde genommen in der Zusammenstellung dieser Berghof.
In regards to the selection of people around him at the Berghof, Hitler mainly relied on Heinrich Hoffmann and Eva Braun. This entourage basically was his emotional foundation.
Dort führte eben sein privates Leben.
His private life took place in the surrounding of these people, whereas his biological family was kept apart.
Die hatten auf dem Berghof seit 1936 überhaupt nichts verloren.
From 1936, they never visited the Berghof. He met with them separately. He selected his own replacement family, which consisted of the Speers, the Bormanns, his doctors' families, the Hoffmanns and Eva Braun and her family. This circle was so important to him that he often retreated to the Berghof before making important political decisions, among this familiar surrounding.
Invitations to the Berghof were highly coveted among the Nazi notables. Even though life up there appeared to be quite stuffy, some of the guests claimed that this petty bourgeois idyll felt intoxicating to them. All that remains of the social life on Obersalzberg are memories of a strange emptiness, Albert Speer wrote later. Hitler hardly ever mentioned the Jews, his political opponents, or even the necessity of building concentration camps. I suppose this wasn't intentional, but rather due to the banal nature of the conversation. Those people of the inner circle were aware of Hitler's special living arrangements. After a while, they took for granted that Eva Braun played the part of the lady of the house on such occasions.
Sie war nicht politisch, kaum je versuchte sie.
She wasn't a political person. She hardly ever tried to influence Hitler. But of course, people talked about politics at the Berghof, in the women's presence as well.
Sie waren sicherlich nicht in alles eingebunden.
They weren't involved in the decision-making or military planning. But there were discussions about how to proceed with Austria after the so-called annexation, for example.
Hitler's secretary, Martin Bormann, was also part of the inner circle. He made sure that all the neighbours disappeared from around the Berghof and supervised its transformation to a secure, restricted area for the Führer. Hitler liked to sleep long and usually ate lunch at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. This was often followed by a long walk with his guests. This time, Ribbentrop appears to be Hitler's preferred conversation partner. Several delicate political matters were discussed confidentially. The foreign minister was a loyal henchman to the dictator, implicitly supporting his plans for war. The destination was always the same, the scenic outpost at Mooslaner Kopf. When the weather is good, there's a superb view towards Salzburg from there. Nearby, Bormann had a tea house built for Hitler. Albert Speer later recalled, "At the coffee table, Hitler often liked to lose himself in endless monologues." Eva Braun filmed a talk with National Youth Leader Baldur von Schirach from a respectful distance. Albert Speer was one of the most frequent visitors. He moved with his family to a house close to the Berghof in 1938 and was good friends with Eva Braun. He claimed after 1945 that she took advantage of her position, like all other prominent collaborators of Hitler. Only few resisted the temptations of being in his entourage. Hitler didn't really resist this development, Speer recalled later. The specific circumstances of his style of leadership led him to increasing loneliness, Speer believed. According to him, Hitler was unable to form normal human relationships. He continued, "In hundreds of talks, he covered topics like fashion, dog breeding, theatre and film, operetta and its stars. Sometimes Hitler fell asleep during his own monologues." Once in a while, the Führer's lover took exceptional photos that would never have been published during his lifetime. They document their special relationship. Eva Braun enjoyed playing the hostess who calls the tune according to her standing. Building the Kehlstein house was the highlight of Bormann's building work at Obersalzberg. In order that the Führer and his entourage could reach its vantage point at 1,800 meters, a road and an elevator needed to be cut into the mountain's rock. But Hitler rarely appeared. It is said that he suffered from vertigo, but Eva Braun enjoyed coming there. She seemed much more playful when the dictator wasn't around. A series of photos shows Hitler and Eva Braun at the Kehlstein house with Magda Goebbels, the propaganda minister's wife, by his side. She had fled to the Berghof with her children and played her part as the betrayed and indignant wife. She complained to the Führer that her husband was having an affair with Czech actress Lida Barova and wanted to establish a ménage à trois. Hitler was enraged and ordered Josef Goebbels to come to the Obersalzberg. It's not clear if these film recordings of Eva Braun show Goebbels' arrival that day or during another visit. The Führer's word of command forced Goebbels to separate from his lover, and Hitler forbade his propaganda minister any further contact with the actress. The marriage with Magda had to be maintained due to reasons of state. Goebbels obeyed the order. This photo of the 1938 New Year party documents the Führer's and Eva Braun's quasi-marital relationship. Hitler, the professed vegetarian, got his own menu, which Eva Braun put into her photo album. The results the dictator got during the traditional lead pouring are not documented. 1939 was the turning point in Hitler's rule. He had achieved one success after another, rearmed Germany, incorporated the Saar region, the Sudetenland, and the whole of Austria into the Third Reich. Even his opponents agreed that he would have been the greatest German since Bismarck if he had died at that point. But the dictator aimed for war, and therefore this moment marked the beginning of his demise. Even though Eva Braun was a good skier, Hitler didn't like her to ski, as he was afraid of her being injured. But once, when the dictator was away from Obersalzberg, he allowed her to go skiing with Albert Speer for 8 days in Austria. Speer later remembered that she danced with young officers until the early morning without being recognized. According to Speer, they both were united in their resentment of Martin Bormann due to his arrogant and crude way of abusing nature and cheating on his wife. During Easter time in 1939, Eva Braun filmed the many children of Speer and Bormann on their hunt for Easter eggs. The children lived secluded from the world on Obersalzberg. It's not known if Eva Braun wished to have children. There were rumors that she once had an abortion in Munich, but there's no proof of that. Speer had sympathy for the unfortunate woman. According to him, Hitler once said in her presence, "Very intelligent men should choose a primitive and simple-minded wife." And imagine I had a wife who meddled in my affairs. I want peace and quiet in my spare time. Meanwhile, the dictator preferred to rule Nazi Germany from the Berghof. There, he developed crucial political and military plans, issued laws and decrees. One of the reasons may have been his firmer relationship with Eva Braun, who always happened to be at Obersalzberg when Hitler was there with his entourage. An adjutant later recalled that it became more and more difficult to obtain decisions from the head of state. It was often impossible, even for representatives from the party and the government, to reach Hitler when he was at Obersalzberg. Only cultural events seemed to be able to lure artist Moncke Hitler from his command center at Obersalzberg. In June 1939, he spontaneously traveled to Vienna to attend the 75th birthday of composer Richard Strauss. On his way back to Berchtesgaden, the Führer visited places where he spent his childhood. Eva Braun filmed his arrival at Fischelham Primary School near Linz. In his book Mein Kampf, Hitler described himself as a little ringleader when the boys of the village played cops and robbers. His class teacher later remembered a skinny, pale boy who despised learning, neglected his talents, and wasn't able to follow school discipline. Back at the Berghof, the dictator planned the imminent military campaign against Poland. In the meantime, the Braun family decided to go on an unusual cruise. Mother Franziska was filmed during her visit to a travel agent's, where she booked a trip to Scandinavia for her and her daughters, Eva and Gretel. Friedrich Braun wasn't part of the tour party. The little tour group arrived in Hamburg shortly thereafter to board the cruise ship Milwaukee. The Brauns, with Eva behind the camera, crossed the harbour on a launch. The Milwaukee was operated by the National Socialist organization Kraft durch Freude, Strength Through Joy, to provide holiday cruises for ordinary national comrades. The former North Atlantic passenger steamer, built in 1929 in Hamburg, had room for 600 guests and was very popular as a cruise ship. Its destination this time, the Norwegian fjords. Eva Braun made a well-groomed appearance on board. Her suits were made by high-class Berlin tailors. Still, Albert Speer described her in his memoirs as modestly and unobtrusively dressed, and that she wore notably cheap jewellery. The first-class passengers passed their time at the pool. Frequently in the camera's focus was Gretel, the younger sister. A a shore excursion in northern Norway. Of course, the locals didn't know that the lover of Nazi Germany's dictator was one of the tourists. Foreign publications frequently wrote that Hitler was liaised with a certain Eva Braun, but they apparently lacked reliable information. Journalist Robert Arndt wrote in a booklet entitled The Women in Hitler's Life that was published in New York in 1944. Eva Braun is hardly the typical Aryan glamour girl. She may be blonde and blue-eyed, but she is stout and ungainly in her appearance. She resembles the image of a German middle-class Hausfrau rather than First Lady of the Reich. Eva hasn't always been the conservative housewife she is now. In the early days of her relationship with Hitler, she was known for the drinks she served the Nazis and even the Führer. She also had a talent for producing perfumes, and it is rumoured that she mixed erotic scents to attract the Führer. Obviously, this description was totally fabricated, and Nazi censorship made sure that it wasn't published in Germany. Gretel relaxed at the pool in her fashionable two-piece swimsuit. She simply adapted to the needs of her older sister, acting as companion and chaperone. Another highlight of the cruise, lobster was served on deck at lunchtime. The Browns wallowed in luxury while their daughter's partner at home was preparing to plunge Europe into another war. On June 17, 1939, Hitler welcomed the special emissary of the Saudi Arabian king for a meeting. During diplomatic meetings, Eva Braun was usually confined to her chambers. She was even ordered to stay in her rooms when important party officials came to the Berghof. Albert Speer believed that Hitler considered her social acceptability to be limited. On such occasions, even the big reception hall was out of bounds for Hitler's lover. When the prominent guests stayed longer, she even had to move to the house of the unpopular Martin Bormann nearby. Sometimes she succeeded in filming scenes like these from a first-floor window. Hitler awaits a visitor on the Berghof stairs. A guard of honor from the SS gets in position. Hitler was convinced during his rise to power that Germany's former greatness could only be achieved by another war, where countries were conquered. Of course, this would need to be done by force. There would be war, and he wanted to start it when he was still physically fit to lead it. The thought of sickness or an early death made him expedite his plans for war. He wanted to start it sooner rather than later. Hitler didn't consider war as something shameful or that should be avoided. Poland would be his first casualty. On August 12, 1939, Eva Braun had to disappear from the scene once more. From a safe distance, she filmed a unit of the Leibstandarte SS that were lined up for the reception of Italy's foreign minister, Count Ciano, who had come to discuss Italy entering the war with Hitler. It isn't clear if Heinrich Hoffmann shot this close-up photo of the visitor. Eva Braun's note in her photo album reads, "There's something forbidden up there. Me." Hitler informed his ally about his decision to attack Poland. Eva Braun called these snapshots of the guest of state's departure viewed from the hotel room's perspective. During that time, Eva Braun was able to film SS Chief Heinrich Himmler with his associates Reinhard Heydrich and Karl Wolff on the Berghof terrace. On several occasions, the dictator discussed the details of war, terror and mass murder with his henchmen at Obersalzberg. Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop also took part in Hitler's talks about his war plans. As peace in Europe hung by a thread, the Führer isolated himself from the ministerial bureaucracy and assembled his confidants. The dictator planned a special coup. Ribbentrop was supposed to travel to Moscow in order to sign a non-aggression pact with Stalin. Heinrich Himmler and his enforcer, Reinhard Heydrich, meticulously prepared the brutal oppression of Poland. They presented the details during their visit at the Berghof. So-called Einsatztruppen, special action squads derived from police and security forces, were to liquidate the Polish ruling classes, as Hitler intended to occupy the country permanently. On August the 23rd, 1939, Hitler nervously awaited positive news from Moscow. Eva Braun's presence was permitted that day. She filmed and took photos. The caption of her professional photo documentation reads, "Then Ribbentrop travelled to Moscow." When Ribbentrop confirmed the pact with the devil, the dictator rejoiced. This will hit like a bomb. Other photos show Hitler, Bormann and Goebbels as the news was spread officially. Eva Braun's comment, "Hitler listens to the news on the radio. Still, Poland refuses to negotiate." Eva Braun's biographer is certain that the women were well aware of the historical significance of those dramatic days at the Berghof.
This situation at the Berghof, shortly before Stalin signed the non-aggression pact, shows how engrossed those men around Hitler were, how much the inner circle with Goebbels and Speer were involved in the political events at that time. Eva Braun photographed that tense situation at the Berghof when Ribbentrop was in Moscow and the signing was imminent. It also shows that the women were inaugurated as well. They spent the evenings and weekends together for weeks, and of course they talked about these events, as they were crucial for them too. Hitler didn't differentiate between private and political life. For him, it was all the same.
Himmler's murder squads were given free rein in the case of armed conflict with Poland because the foreign minister's agreement with Moscow guaranteed that Stalin's Red Army wouldn't intervene, but only occupy and annex the eastern part of Poland. So, Obersalzberg played a crucial part on the path to the Second World War. All attempts to stop Hitler on his way to destruction were doomed to fail. Nine days later, the dictator declared war on Poland. Eva Braun supposedly cried when he proclaimed at the Reichstag, "Now more than ever, my life belongs to my people. I want nothing more than to be the first soldier of the German Reich. I have put on the uniform again that was always my most sacred, cherished possession. I will only take it off after our victory, or I will not live to see the end." On that September the 1st, 1939, Eva Braun supposedly told her older sister Ilse, "This means war. He'll leave, and what will become of me?" According to Ilse Braun's memories, she also said, "If something happens to him, I'll die too." The same evening, Eva Braun ordered food and drinks to be brought to the storage rooms of the Berghof. She supposedly explained, "We need lots of supplies. We'll need them to last for a long time." The Obersalzberg at the beginning of 1940. Eva Braun went on a skiing tour with adjutants of the Führer. She had been Adolf Hitler's lover for almost 10 years now, but only few in the immediate circle knew of their relationship. The 27-year-old had long accepted the fact that she could only live in the shadows. In fact, Eva Braun was a very unhappy woman.
Sie war im goldenen Käfig und nicht mal in dem
She lived in a golden cage that wasn't even particularly golden.
Wenn man in so einem
She was caged in, and it's perfectly natural to be unhappy in such a situation where you cannot express yourself.
dann muss man
She had already tried to take her life twice before, once with a pistol, once with sleeping pills.
Pistole, einmal mit Tabletten.
I think those attempts were a cry for help, and it worked insofar as Hitler cared about her more after that.
The war changed everything. The Alpine residence always became the Führer's headquarters when Hitler stayed at Obersalzberg. After defeating Poland, Hitler planned his next campaign against France. He had little time for his lover.
We know that he treated her like a wife. He needed someone like her to be loyal and trusting, someone he could rely on. She supported him mentally and emotionally until the end.
Who was that woman Hitler married shortly before his suicide? And what was life like with the greatest mass murderer in human history? In the meantime, nobody took notice anymore that Eva Braun, as a matter of course, played the lady of the house at Obersalzberg. She was addressed as gnädiges Fräulein, Madam, or Fräulein Braun, Miss Braun. The staff called her the boss. The ideal world of Obersalzberg, the fake idyll of the Berghof and its inhabitants, were maintained for the public during the war as well. The dictator seemed untouchable up there. He also didn't cease his long walks. Sometimes, not only Eva's female friends were allowed to accompany him, but also outsiders like actress Magda Schneider, Romy Schneider's mother. Only close confidants like architect Albert Speer still had unlimited access to the dictator. Hitler's entourage soon complained about his growing unapproachability. Eva Braun's passion for photography was still unabated. She put all of her photos in her albums that were only discovered by chance after 1945. Christmas, New Year, 1939-1940, Berghof. Hitler taking care of his 9-month-old German shepherd, Wolf. She didn't give up filming either, which is the reason why the same scene also exists on 16mm colour film. The man of the house also let himself be filmed having coffee and cake, together with Albert Speer's children. The architect's family didn't live far away from the Berghof. Normally, Hitler's residence was off limits for the little ones, but at Christmas and on the Führer's birthday, they provided a welcome facade to create the illusion of a normal private life. One of Hitler's secretaries asked herself later, self-critically, how was that possible? A ruthless warmonger and fanatical mass murderer enjoyed lighting Christmas tree candles at the Berghof and had a distinct need for the joys of family life.
It's hard
to imagine Hitler, someone who ordered the Holocaust, as a nice and pleasant person in private. especially for the Germans or people in general after 1945. It was easier to picture him as a monster, a demon, just to distance themselves from that period of time. It was simple to separate yourself from him like that, and people from his immediate surrounding promoted a political and personal distance towards him out of their own interest. So not much was known about his real private life.
On New Year's Eve 1940, the dictator hosted a reception for the Berghof staff. Heinrich Hoffmann, his personal photographer from Munich, was also invited. Even during wartime, the Führer's old comrade made millions with postcards and photo books, and Hitler also got a good share of the profits. The new strongman at Obersalzberg was party secretary Martin Bormann. You had to get past him to approach the dictator. Bormann carried out all Hitler's unpleasant tasks. Gretel Braun was also part of the inner circle. She shared her older sister's passion for film and photography. Theo Morell, a popular doctor from Munich, also became part of that circle. He successfully healed Heinrich Hoffmann from venereal disease. The Brauns considered him a miracle healer. As almost every year, everybody gathered for a group photo. These photos from Eva Braun's album clearly indicate how she openly staged herself as Hitler's life partner. When Hitler wasn't at the Obersalzberg, Eva Braun retreated to the little house in Munich that was given to her by the Führer as a present. She held big parties there with her mother Franziska and sister Gretel. Her father, Friedrich, also reconciled himself to the fact that his daughter's relationship would remain a marriage without a certificate. Eva Braun still edited short films from her colour film recordings, which were then screened at the Berghof. Going for Walkies is the title of this short sequence she most likely shot in early 1940 at Wasserburger Street in Munich. From the beginning of April 1940, the dictator resided at the Berghof again. For months, Hitler had been planning his war against France. The Führer was confident that if he was victorious before Great Britain gained a foothold on the European mainland, the British would have to ask for peace. In the meantime, the dictator focused his attention on Scandinavia. Hitler had long since had detailed plans prepared for military action at the Norwegian Sea. On the 9th of April 1940, Operation Weserübung, Weser exercise, began, leading to the Wehrmacht's successful invasion of Norway. The small entourage of adjutants, secretaries, and old companions of the Führer, like Albert Speer, assembled on the terrace. It was claimed later that Hitler never talked politics in the presence of women. After the war, the surviving members of the inner circle professed that the dictator left them in limbo about his war plans. Nevertheless, Eva Braun's biographer doubts that the entourage was surprised by the attacks against Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg and France on May the 10th, 1940. Heinrich Hoffmann claimed in his memoirs that even during his trip to the Western Front, he believed that occupied Norway was the destination. His profession as photographer meant that he was at Hitler's side, and he most likely had more information than he wanted to admit later. Eva and Gretel Braun's films document how casual life was at the Berghof. While the Führer talked business with his adjutants, the ladies sat on a wall nearby. Hitler's reputed tendency towards utmost secrecy may have been a convenient assertion of the inner circle to avoid tiresome questions. Sometimes Eva Braun couldn't wait for her lover to leave the Berghof. One of the bodyguards later reported, "The limousines were still driving down the slopes of the mountain, and already the preparations for festivities were underway. 1 minute acting like a demure governess, she switched to full party mood in an instant, behaving in a playful, almost childish way." Hilda Speer at Mooslaner Kopf. When the Führer let himself be filmed at Obersalzberg, he liked to surround himself with the architect's children. Their father later recalled, "He never found the right, relaxed way to deal with them. A few gracious words and he turned to the next one. He considered children as offspring, representatives of the next generation. He enjoyed the way they looked, blonde, blue-eyed, their stature, sturdy, healthy, or their intelligence, bright, active, rather than their childlike behavior. He didn't win over my children with his personality." These photos from Eva's albums document that Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun privately behaved like a married couple, but the Führer still ruled out marriage.
Hitler was the only reason why he and Eva Braun didn't get married. He was afraid of a wife, afraid of her possible legal claims. That's what he also mentioned clearly in his talks at the Führerhauptquartier after 1942. A lover always remains something casual. She has no claims, and she stays dependent.
It's unclear if it was a strictly platonic relationship. Still today there are speculations as to whether Hitler lived out his sexuality at all. Eva's cousin didn't believe that it was an intimate relationship.
Für mich war es ja kein Verhältnis.
I didn't see it as a regular relationship, more like one between father and daughter.
Auch bis heute halte ich das auf.
I may still believe it because I want it to be true. The thought of this man touching her is unbearable for me.
Der ist für mich einfach unerträglich.
At the Berghof, a small passage led from Eva Braun's bedroom to Hitler's. She had her own living quarters, but the photos of those rooms in her album don't give away any private details.
It's hard to come to a conclusion regarding the intimacy of this relationship, as there is no proof. There aren't any letters from Hitler to Eva Braun. Even though many historians searched for years, they haven't found anything. Also, there are no letters from Eva Braun to Hitler. Everything has been destroyed, most likely before the final hours. It's quite possible that after the end of the war, the Braun family took care of the destruction of such letters as well.
Albert Speer recalled as follows, "I was surprised that she and Hitler avoided anything that could imply an intimate relationship, but still in the evenings they went upstairs to the bedrooms together." Hitler's pet names for Eva Braun were Haschel and Chapelle. After the war, former servants were asked repeatedly if they noticed anything. They spoke of ruffled bedclothes, but there was nothing more concrete. One historian even claimed that the Führer was a homosexual whose relationship to Eva Braun was only a pretense, but there's no evidence for that theory either. Fact is that Eva Braun's terriers, Stasi and Negus, jealously watched their mistress's door. While the Wehrmacht invaded France within a few weeks and occupied Paris, Eva Braun spent her time at Obersalzberg. Then she was allowed to come to Berlin to celebrate the victory. The dictator returned to the Reich Chancellery on July the 6th, 1940, as a victorious field commander. Eva Braun filmed the scene from a window. "Flowers cover the streets where our Führer goes," Joseph Goebbels wrote enthusiastically. "Our people, our wonderful people." Meanwhile, Hitler's companion had her own rooms in the Führer's living quarters at the government headquarters. Speer wrote in his memoirs that she entered via a side entrance and stairway. She stayed in the rooms below, only when familiar faces were present. Eva Braun turned 29 on February the 6th, 1941. Her partner wasn't present. She celebrated with her family. As usual, he had jewelry sent to her as a gift. In the presence of her father Friedrich, mother Franziska and sister Gretel, Eva Braun was happier than usual. Everybody profited from her special relationship with Hitler. Nobody reproached her anymore.
During the early years, her parents may have disapproved of a relationship that didn't result in marriage. But, after all, as her father also said later, they were proud that their daughter was the Führer's girlfriend. At one point, during his trial, he also mentioned that his daughter wouldn't have chosen Hitler if he had been a bad person.
The dictator was in high spirits at the beginning of June 1941 at Obersalzberg. By then, he had subjected major parts of Western and Northern Europe to his rule. By his side, SS commander Sepp Dietrich, an old comrade of his from the early days of the Nazi movement. Since December 1940, the dictator had been working out plans for a war of extermination against the Soviet Union. And these were developed further during staff meetings with his commanders at his Alpine refuge. Operation Barbarossa probably got its name from the panoramic view to the Untersberg. The mountain is said to be one of the mythical places where Emperor Friedrich Barbarossa has lain asleep for almost 1,000 years. A camera is demonstrated to the commander-in-chief. Eva and Gretel Braun filmed the scene. Their film, shot only a few weeks before the attack on the Soviet Union, was called Auf dem Berghof, at the Berghof. It's unclear if Hitler shared his plans with Eva Braun. Her biographer is sure that he somehow revealed them to his loyal partner. The Führer intended to destroy the Jewish Bolshevism. He believed that Great Britain would only cease resistance once Soviet Russia was defeated after a swift attack. The Braun sisters photographed and filmed this scene as well, on a day in June 1941. Hitler with one of Martin Bormann's sons. The dictator patiently agreed to pose like this. This is how Eva liked to see him, relaxed and in private. She frequently sold photos like this to Heinrich Hoffmann, who published them in propaganda photo books. Sepp Dietrich also let himself be filmed or photographed with the Speer family. His armoured division later repeatedly took part in war crimes and massacres. After the war, the so-called storyteller was sentenced to life imprisonment, but he never renounced his National Socialist convictions. As Hitler and his generals prepared for the start of the war against the Soviet Union, the women travelled to Italy. The group consisted of the Braun sisters, their mother Franziska, 2 friends, and Margareta Speer. Florence was their first destination. They were able to go shopping without being recognized, as Italy was ruled by friendly dictator Benito Mussolini. The women from Hitler's entourage remained fashion-conscious despite the war. Hats, dresses and suits were tailored in Berlin or sent to them from occupied Paris. Then the small tour group travelled to Naples to visit the ruins of Pompeii and Herculaneum. In the year 79 BC, both towns were caught off guard by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius and completely destroyed. Eva Braun visited the ancient amphitheatre wearing an elegant trouser suit. Afterwards, the ladies visited the volcano that was still occasionally active. Gretel Braun filmed her sister Eva amidst sulphur fumes and lava. Mount Vesuvius brought death in huge numbers to Pompeii and Herculaneum. In light of things to come during the war, these images are quite symbolic. 1 year later, the Berghof community assembled on the terrace to be filmed and photographed. 1942 was the year when the dictator's luck changed. One defeat followed another. This is evident in the Führer's appearance. Albert Speer later recalled that Hitler became less flexible in his thinking. He wasn't really able to develop new ideas. He was basically running on a fixed track and didn't have the strength to change direction. In the meantime, the Holocaust in the East was in full swing. The deportation from Germany and the occupied countries had begun.
Das ist sehr schwer zu beantworten, wie viel.
It's hard to tell how much she or the other women knew. Of course, those people weren't just spectators. They were privy of many things that happened.
Lebte in München. Das war
Eva Braun lived in Munich, and after 1933 you could see how the Jewish citizens were disfranchised. You read in every newspaper about the Aryanization. So the only question is if they knew about the physical annihilation of the Jews, that they were killed at the concentration camps. It's hard to tell. But we can be sure that everybody in Hitler's inner circle shared his anti-Semitic views.
At that point in time, Eva Braun was life partner to a mass murderer. Friedrich Braun had been conscripted to the Wehrmacht. The family photo also shows his eldest daughter Ilse, who worked for Albert Speer as a secretary. But unlike Gretel, she was not part of Hitler's entourage. As Ilse didn't earn a lot of money, Eva sent her 10 marks per month. She wrote that she couldn't ask the Führer for any favors for her family. When her sister criticized the dictator's politics, Eva forbade her to ever mention this topic again. Supposedly, she said, "If the Führer ever puts you in a concentration camp, I won't be the one to save you." In Eva's garden in Munich, the Brauns and their friends appeared in front of the camera to be in good spirits and content. But the Führer's 30-year-old lover had changed. Ilse Braun noted in her diary back then, Eva had become arrogant, tyrannical and tactless towards her family. Because she mixed with the VIPs, she behaved selfishly and sometimes cruelly. She gave away her discarded clothes as if she were the queen. In the summer of 1942, heavy suitcases were carried out of the house in Wasserburger Street. The Braun family and some of their friends were going on a holiday again, with the Führer's permission. Eva Braun brought her camera again. This was her last trip to Italy. An aeroplane from the Führer's fleet of planes took the ladies and gentlemen from Munich-Riem Airport to the sunny south. The Führer's chief pilot, Hans Bauer, was at the controls. During wartime, a costly pleasure trip was a rare privilege. German citizens weren't allowed to leave the country without special permission, and they could only take small sums of money with them. Their destination was the beach resort of Portofino near Genoa, where the Brauns had spent their holidays several times before. Eva, Gretel and a friend enjoyed their time by the sea. Unlike at the Berghof, they drank a lot of alcohol. During that summer, the Brauns spent 4 weeks with their friends in Italy. As German troops reached the Caucasus in the Soviet Union, Mother Franziska and her daughter Gretel passed their time knitting. Far from war and destruction, Eva Braun appears to be especially happy in this scene. Her dream world still existed. Hitler's secretary Martin Bormann had taken special precautions at Obersalzberg to protect the Führer against attacks from the land below or the air. The Obersalzberg could be enveloped in fog by special cannons. At the beginning of 1943, Hitler tested out this countermeasure for himself. He still felt safe from the Allied air forces that had begun to raze German cities to the ground. Since the surrender of the 6th Army at Stalingrad, the Führer reflected on a possible fall of the Third Reich behind closed doors. He confided in Propaganda Minister Goebbels, "Such a fall could only be the result of the German people's weakness. If the German people ever became that weak, they would deserve to be annihilated by a stronger people. They wouldn't deserve any pity then." Uschi, the daughter of Eva's friend Hertha Schneider, often had to pose for photos and films. Eva's biographer believes that she staged this family idyll to express her wishes for her future private life. When these scenes were filmed, Jewish children were being killed systematically at the death camps in the East. The Führer's birthdays were a fixed event in the social life at the Berghof. In 1943, Heinrich Hoffmann gave him a photo book as a present. The children of Bormann and Speer dutifully congratulated him. The maids and servants were also allowed to pay their respects to the 54-year-old dictator. Only 2 years later, Hitler would shoot himself in the head in his bunker under the Reichskanzlei's garden. "32-year-old Eva Braun became more and more important to Hitler. For the first time, Joseph Goebbels mentioned her in his diary. The Führer praises the quiet, intelligent and down-to-earth character of Eva Braun. She will be a valuable support for him."
It can't be denied that Hitler aged visibly during that war he couldn't win, and the early stages of his Parkinson's disease started to show. It's a harsh contrast to those early photos and films that Eva Braun shot of him.
The propaganda minister noted on March 14, 1944, "Fräulein Braun showed us several colour films in her room. We could see the Führer during peaceful times. I have never seen him so relaxed on film before, but it was also apparent how much the Führer has changed during war."
In March
of 1944, the war was basically over. Their downfall had become apparent. This doomsday feeling had spread widely at the Berghof.
In dieser Situation die alten Filme Eva Brauns hervorzukramen.
That they screened the old films of Eva Braun again showed that they wanted to escape that situation and recall the former happy days and the peaceful times they spent there.
Das zeigt auch, wie eng diese Gesellschaft
These people had a special bond, and they wanted to feel united again during those days.
Beschwören wollte.
On April the 20th, Hitler celebrated his 55th birthday at Obersalzberg. Eva Braun frequently complained about migraines, and Hitler patted her shoulder in concern. In public, they now behaved much less formally. On June the 3rd, 1944, Eva Braun's sister Gretel married SS Gruppenführer Hermann Fegelein in Salzburg. Hitler's secretary Martin Bormann served as one of the witnesses. Fegelein, who killed tens of thousands of civilians in the East as commander of an SS cavalry brigade, saw his career secured. Hitler's secretary Christa Schröder later claimed that Eva arranged that marriage in order to see her sister finally married, and because she was in love with Fegelein herself. SS Commander Heinrich Himmler officiated at the wedding. According to the secretary, Eva Braun said, "I want this wedding to be as beautiful as if it were my own." The celebration took place at Obersalzberg. The bride was all dressed up and enjoyed her big day. Hermann Fegelein was considered a womanizer, and Christa Schröder believed that he rather liked the idea of being a kind of brother-in-law to the Führer. Eva supposedly said, "I'm grateful that Fegelein married my sister. Now I'm somebody. I'm Fegelein's sister-in-law." At the Great Hall of the Berghof, the dictator posed for a group photo with the newlyweds. Eva Braun wasn't in the picture. When Fegelein later fled from Hitler's bunker in April 1945, Hitler had him arrested, court-martialed, and shot. For the wedding banquet at Kehlstein, Martin Bormann had all available food and drinks served from the Berghof's still bulging storage rooms. 3 days after the feast, the Western Allies landed on the beaches of Normandy. It was the Second World War's final phase. The dictator left Obersalzberg for Eastern Prussia, leaving Eva Braun behind. When she received the message about the attempt on Hitler's life on July the 20th, 1944, she had a nervous breakdown. The slightly injured dictator had a macabre souvenir of the assault sent to her.
Die Tatsache, dass Hitler ihr nach dem 20.
The fact that Hitler sent her his shredded uniform after July 20th, 1944, shows how much she meant to him. Of course, he also tried to super-elevate his soldiership. "This is how I fight for my country. I'm doing everything in my power to reach my goals."
Meine Ziele zu erreichen. Im Grunde genommen war es ja ganz anders.
But the reality was different. He was secluded and separated from the world at the Wolfschanze, his headquarters. It's remarkable that he wanted her to see his shredded uniform. He acted basically like every normal man in his relation with her.
In the following weeks, Eva Braun travelled back and forth between Munich and Berchtesgaden. Her family didn't accompany her to Obersalzberg. Because she felt lonely there, she asked her cousin Gertraud from Jena to come and visit her. The 19-year-old was finally allowed to travel to Munich in August 1944.
Two SS men waited for me. One took my suitcase and the other said, "Get in the car, we'll take you to your cousin." I still thought they would take me to Munich, as I wanted to be there with her. But we drove out of the city, and I asked, "Where are we going?" The driver said, "We'll take you to Obersalzberg."
Since Hitler had left the Alpine refuge with his military retinue, it had quietened down there. Sometimes there was an air raid alert, but the British and Americans hadn't dared an attack on the Berghof. The restricted area was still under heavy guard by flak units and soldiers of the SS.
I had to open my suitcase and empty it, and I asked, "I don't know what this is all about. I only want to visit my cousin." They ordered me to empty it, and I did. And afterwards, I received a note that said, "Guest of the Führer."
The storage rooms were still well equipped in case of Hitler's return. Some servants looked after the Berghof and Eva Braun. When Gertraud arrived, her cousin wasn't there.
I was welcomed by a woman who led me to my room, and I asked where my cousin was. "She's at Königssee." I was told to relax a little and get comfortable, as she had gone for a swim there.
Film recordings from better days. Eva Braun with her family and friends at a waterfall above Königssee. Her father, Fritz, enjoyed the benefits resulting from his daughter's relationship until the bitter end. Gretel Fegelein had become pregnant in the meantime. She would give birth to her child during the chaos of the last months of war. Her husband had begun an affair with an actress from Berlin. After an SS soldier had caught him in the act, Hermann Fegelein had become persona non grata at Obersalzberg. In late summer 1944, Eva Braun went swimming with her cousin again. She always gave a happy-go-lucky impression.
Her happiness was so garish, it was obviously fake. I realized that it was only a facade, to cover up things that shouldn't be seen by others.
After a swim, the small group sunbathed at Kehlstein Plateau. The ladies even smoked, which was frowned upon in Hitler's presence. Eva Braun liked to smoke a lot. Just to annoy her partner, she allegedly often hummed the American song, "Smoke Gets in Your Eyes." She only became interested in the war's progress when the Allies reached the borders of Nazi Germany.
She completely ignored it until one day we were at the tea house. I saw a radio there and claimed that I wanted to move into the tea house. She agreed and just said, "You want to listen to the radio?" And I replied, "Yes, I want to know what's happening." There was no radio, no newspapers, only a few fashion magazines, mostly from out of the country. We were secluded from the world, and then I started bringing her the news.
And in September 1944, the news was anything but encouraging. Paris was liberated, the Americans had reached Aachen, and the Red Army, Eastern Prussia.
She got more and more serious then. Autumn came, and we didn't go swimming anymore. I had breakfast and retired during the mornings. The frantic joyfulness was gone. And I think she was woken up by the news one day and then started planning her future path through life or to death.
After the failed attempt on Hitler's life, she supposedly wrote in a letter, the authenticity of which has never been confirmed, "My love, you know I always told you that I would die if something happened to you. I swore to myself from the first day we met that I would follow you everywhere you go, even to the death. You know that I only live for your love. Yours, Eva."
Mir ist es sehr, sehr bald eigentlich aufgegangen.
I soon realized that his phone calls played a crucial part in her life. She always waited eagerly for them.
Wichtige Funktion in ihrem Leben gehabt haben. Es drehte sich eigentlich
They didn't talk very long, not for hours, but maybe 10 minutes.
Stundenlang telefoniert oder so. Sondern
We watched a movie. The phone rang, somebody ran outside to get it and then said, "Fräulein Braun, it's for you."
Und dann rannte sie raus und wir haben die
She ran outside and we continued with the movie.
Da habe ich gemerkt, also sie
The calls weren't really long,
Anrufe, sie braucht sie.
and I don't know what they
Was
talked
da
about,
gesprochen worden ist, weiß ich natürlich nicht.
but it was
Aber so
very
wie ich
important
die
to
Sache
her.
einschätze, war es wichtig, dass angerufen worden ist. Und
He called, "We can leave
jetzt
now."
hat er angerufen, jetzt können wir
He
gehen.
called, "We can
Jetzt hat er
drive to
angerufen,
Munich
jetzt können
now."
wir nach München
Or,
fahren.
"Let's go for a
Komm, wir
walk."
machen noch einen Spaziergang.
She always waited for his call and counted on him. If he wouldn't have called, she would have been very sad. But the calls always came.
Aber sie sind gekommen.
Eva Braun rarely drove to Munich anymore since her hometown had been bombarded. The future appeared so bleak to her that she dictated her last will and testament on October the 26th, 1944, in which she left all she possessed to her family.
Nachdem Bomben auf München gefallen waren,
After the bombs had fallen on Munich, she realized that the end was near. It's remarkable that a 32-year-old woman wrote her last will and testament, basically declaring that she was certain that she would die together with Hitler.
Vor allen Dingen aber damit zu erklären, dass sie schon
She
sehr
wanted to
früh
die with him,
ganz
no
sicher
matter
war,
where.
dass sie mit Hitler sterben
If he would have stayed in Eastern Prussia, she may have taken her own life in Munich.
Ostpreußen geblieben wäre, hätte sie sich wahrscheinlich in München
Of course, she didn't know how the end would come, but when she wrote her will, she had realized that when Hitler died, she would die too.
Klar, wenn Hitler stirbt, sterbe ich auch.
At the beginning of March 1945, she went on her last trip to Berlin.
Die Fahrt Eva Brauns nach
Her trip to Berlin had most likely been arranged. It wasn't just out of the blue.
Plötzlich war Eva Braun.
It was quite clear that she would go there to die together with Hitler. She didn't just show up at the bunker. The wedding at the end was a spontaneous decision. He must have thought that he owed it to her and her loyalty throughout all those years.
She said her goodbyes to family and friends during a 4-week stay in Munich. Gertraud had left Obersalzberg already in October 1944. For a long time, she believed that her cousin had stayed there until the end.
Ich habe dann der Eva noch geschrieben, auch Adresse Berghof, und habe nichts.
I sent a letter to Eva at the Berghof address, but I didn't hear back from her. I heard it on the news. First, they said that Hitler died a hero's death, and I still didn't know about Eva. But in June, they mentioned for the first time that he had married and taken his life together with his wife. I got the impression that she somehow wanted to let her family know that she had married after all.
Sie hat ja das Leben einer Mätresse geführt.
She led the life of a mistress, and the family wasn't happy about it, no matter if she was the mistress of Hitler or anybody else. But in the end, she became a married woman.
Und sie ist dann doch eben Ehefrau geworden.
I can imagine that this was very important to her. She married a sick old man, a murderer, a criminal.
Eines todkranken Mannes geworden, eines Verbrechers, eines Mörders.
And her last consequence was going to her death with him.
The dictator married Eva Braun during the night of the 28th to the 29th of April, 1945, but their union did not even last for 48 hours. At 4:30 in the afternoon on April the 30th, Eva Hitler poisoned herself with potassium cyanide. Shortly thereafter, Adolf Hitler also committed suicide. Their bodies were soaked with petrol and burnt.